They say a mother's love is always repaid, but the truth is, sometimes love is met with betrayal. I'm Alara Whitmore, born in 1954 in Melbourne, Australia. Back in 1987, when I was just 33, I buried my husband after a sudden heart attack, leaving me with one child and no one else to lean on. I felt broken, but then something happened that forced me to harden. Today, at 71, I'm finally sharing this because silence has weighed too long on me. If you're listening, drop your city below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The night of my son Adrian's wedding, I dressed simply, wearing a pale blue dress with silver embroidery, nothing too loud. I had always preferred to blend into the background. The reception hall in Sydney was buzzing with lights, crystal chandeliers, and the clink of champagne glasses. Guests filled every corner, laughter bouncing off marble walls. My heart should have been full. After all, a mother only dreams of seeing her son marry and start a new life. But I had a knot in my chest that wouldn't loosen. It happened in an instant so suddenly I could barely register it. Freya, my new daughter-in-law, leaned in with her flawless smile. "Taste the food," she said sweetly, her voice sugar-coated before the venom struck. Then, before I could respond, her hand pressed firmly at the back of my head, shoving my face straight into the steaming mound of mashed potatoes sitting on my plate. The hall erupted with gasps, some stifled laughter, others stunned silence. I pulled back, cream and butter dripping down my cheeks, humiliation burning hotter than the chandeliers above us. Adrian froze. His fork clattered against the plate, but he didn't rise. He didn't even speak. His face was pale, caught between shock and denial. Freya tilted her head, pretending innocence, as if the act were some playful joke. "Oh, I didn't mean it that way," she said loudly, laughing to draw the room into her defense. A few guests chuckled awkwardly, not daring to cross the bride on her day. My chest tightened, my throat aching not from the food but from betrayal. That moment, my life seemed to fold in on itself. Every sacrifice, every lonely night spent building a future, every time I worked double shifts instead of tucking Adrian into bed, it all played back in my mind. I had promised myself long ago never to let bitterness consume me. Yet that night, bitterness wrapped itself around me like a noose. I wiped my face with the corner of the linen napkin, refusing to let them see me crumble. My eyes scanned the tables, catching familiar faces, pretending not to look. "I'm fine," I whispered, forcing steadiness into my voice. But deep inside, a storm was rising. When Adrian didn't defend me, the wound cut deeper than Freya's cruelty. I understood then that the distance between us was not just from the years, it was also from the secrets I had buried. Adrian had grown up thinking I was just an ordinary woman, scraping by to give him a modest life. He never knew that behind the rented houses and second-hand furniture, I was silently building an empire. After his father's death, I had sworn never to let poverty dictate our fate again. I bought tiny parcels of land in outer Melbourne, saved every cent, reinvested, and fought off men twice my size who tried to cheat me in boardrooms. By the time Adrian finished university, I was no longer poor. I was a billionaire hidden in plain sight. But I never told him. I feared greed. I feared wolves dressed as lovers who would use him for his inheritance. I thought I was protecting him by living simply, hiding the cars and penthouses under different names. Now, looking at Freya, I realized my silence had left him defenseless. She was exactly the type I had spent decades shielding him from. Her polished accent, her studied elegance, the way she carried herself like she was born into wealth, it was all performance. I had seen her type in corporate boardrooms, hungry, patient, and utterly ruthless. As the night dragged on, whispers circled the tables. I left early, walking into the cool Sydney night. My heels clicked against the pavement, each step echoing with both shame and clarity. Freya had revealed herself in front of hundreds, and Adrian had chosen silence. That was my answer. The next morning, I sat in the quiet of my small terrace house, the one Adrian thought was all I owned. My reflection in the mirror showed traces of mashed potatoes clinging to my hair, despite 3 washes. It wasn't the food that clung, it was the humiliation. My phone buzzed with messages from relatives, some sympathetic, others cruelly amused. Not one from Adrian. I made tea, sat by the window, and let memories wash over me. I remembered the day I sold my wedding ring to pay for Adrian's school fees. I remembered carrying bricks on construction sites when contractors refused to take me seriously. I remembered sitting in corporate offices, smiling politely as men underestimated me, before I signed papers that gave me half of Sydney's northern coast. I had fought like a wolf to create security. And now, in one dinner hall, it felt like all those battles meant nothing. But then my anger sharpened into resolve. I had spent a lifetime surviving storms. I had not come this far to let a spoiled girl destroy me or take what I built. If Freya wanted war, she had chosen the wrong woman. I began making calls. Old contacts, private investigators, lawyers who owed me favors. I wanted to know everything about Freya, her past, her family, her debts, her secrets. And within days, whispers started to filter back. Whispers that confirmed what I already suspected. Freya was no innocent bride. She had a trail behind her, one littered with discarded men, broken engagements, and lawsuits that mysteriously disappeared. One name surfaced again and again, Dr. Magnus Kellerman, a psychiatrist who had testified on her behalf in 2 previous cases, always painting her as the fragile, misunderstood woman. The puzzle pieces began to fit together. If she had used him before, she would use him again. And given the rumors she was already spreading about my forgetfulness and eccentricities, I knew her game. She wanted to paint me as mentally unstable, to take Adrian's loyalty and, eventually, my fortune. That night, I sat at my desk, the city lights twinkling outside, and whispered to myself, "Let her come. Let her think I am weak." My hands did not tremble as I opened the leather-bound folder where I kept my true accounts, properties, and company records. Each page was a testament to survival. And now, they would become weapons. I thought of Adrian, his innocent face as a child, his trust in me. Somewhere along the way, that trust had eroded. He had grown into a man who did not know who his mother truly was. And while my heart ached with the thought, I also knew one truth. He needed to see the monster behind Freya's smile with his own eyes. So I began to weave my plan. Not loudly, not with anger, but with patience. Just as I had built an empire brick by brick, I would dismantle Freya's facade thread by thread. I woke the next morning determined, my body humming with a kind of fire I had not felt since my 30s. Freya thought she had crushed me with mashed potatoes, but all she had done was awaken a lioness who had been resting too long. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, smoothed the faint wrinkles on my cheek, and whispered, "You've survived worse, Alara." I moved in silence. My first step was information, real, undeniable proof of who Freya truly was. I contacted an old associate, Marcus Leclerc, a retired private investigator who had once handled corporate espionage cases for me in Paris. He owed me more than a favor. I had saved his firm from bankruptcy 2 decades ago. He didn't hesitate. "Send me her name, her date of birth, everything you know," he said over the phone, his voice rough but reliable. "Give me a week." But I didn't wait idly. I began planting seeds of my own. At family dinners, when Adrian called to invite me, I pretended forgetfulness. I lost my keys, forgot small details, and repeated questions. Freya smirked at me across the table, believing she was witnessing my decline. "Poor Alara," she whispered once, patting my hand with mock sympathy. "It must be so hard, getting older." I smiled sweetly and allowed her to think she was winning. Meanwhile, Marcus's updates came like pieces of a puzzle. Freya had been engaged twice before Adrian, both men older, both wealthy. One drowned under mysterious circumstances while vacationing in Bali. The other had declared bankruptcy shortly after transferring large sums into her accounts. Both cases smelled rotten. And in both, Dr. Magnus Kellerman had conveniently testified about her fragile mental health, turning suspicion away from her and onto the men who had dared accuse her of manipulation. I printed everything Marcus sent: photos, court documents, financial trails, and locked them in a steel cabinet. Each page felt like a step closer to reclaiming my dignity. Adrian, of course, was blind. He adored her, worshipped her even. One evening he visited me alone, his face tired. "Mom, I need you to accept Freya. She's my wife now. We're starting a family." I wanted to scream that his wife was a predator, but I swallowed my words. Instead, I touched his hand and said, "Of course, Adrian. I'll do whatever I can." Inside, my heart cracked. He still hadn't asked if I was okay after the wedding. That was when I decided to set the trap. I invited Freya over to my home one afternoon under the pretense of wanting to transfer some financial matters to Adrian before my health worsened. She arrived in a cream-colored dress, pearls around her neck, her eyes glittering with expectation. I played the role of a frail old woman, sighing heavily, clutching the armrest as though I couldn't rise without help. "I've been thinking, Freya," I said, my voice soft, almost trembling. "It's time I stopped pretending I can handle everything. Adrian deserves to know about my little savings. I want to transfer some assets to him. But, of course, I'll need a co-trustee to make sure it's all handled properly." Her lips curved into a smile she tried to suppress. "Oh, Alara, that's so thoughtful of you. Of course, Adrian would be honored. And I'll help him with whatever is needed." Every word dripped with greed. I nodded slowly, pretending not to notice the gleam in her eyes. What she didn't know is that every word was being recorded. Hidden in the wooden clock on my mantel was a high-grade microphone Marcus had installed. Over the next few weeks, I repeated the performance. Each time Freya visited, I dropped hints of confusion, spoke of transferring millions I claimed were tucked away, and watched as she leaned closer, eager, her hunger impossible to hide. She spoke too freely, whispering about finally getting Adrian into the right position, and how the old woman won't last much longer. Each phrase went straight into my archive of evidence. But I wasn't content with words alone. I needed her to show action. That's when I let slip, during a staged phone call with my lawyer, that I was considering changing my will. I made sure Freya overheard. The very next week, Adrian received a call from Dr. Magnus Kellerman, recommending a psychiatric evaluation for me. "Just routine," Freya insisted sweetly. "We need to make sure she's okay before she does something she'll regret." My stomach twisted, but my face never revealed it. I agreed to the evaluation, sitting calmly in Dr. Magnus' office. He was a tall man with piercing eyes, his words dripping with false concern. "Mrs. Whitmore, do you ever forget what day it is? Do you feel confused in public?" I answered carefully, sometimes stammering, sometimes drifting off mid-sentence. He scribbled notes, convinced he was catching decline. But what he didn't know was that I had memorized his history too, cases he had manipulated, testimonies he had sold. Marcus had uncovered bank transfers, secret payments, all tied to women like Freya. He was as dirty as she was. After the session, I thanked him kindly, shaking his hand firmly. "You've been very helpful, Doctor." He smiled, believing he had sealed my fate. The net was tightening. One evening, Adrian and Freya came over for dinner. I prepared roast lamb, pouring them wine as though everything were normal. Halfway through, I sighed dramatically and said, "I've spoken to my lawyer. I think it's best that Adrian takes control of my accounts. Freya, you'll be listed as co-trustee." Her eyes sparkled. Adrian looked uncertain, but Freya clutched his arm. "That's wonderful, Alara. Really, you're doing the right thing." I excused myself, slipping into the kitchen where a second hidden recorder caught her gushing words. Finally, she whispered to Adrian, "Do you know what this means? We'll have access to everything. All of it." Adrian laughed nervously, brushing her off, but he didn't protest. That cut me deep, but I knew he was too far to see the trap yet. Later that night, alone in my room, I placed all the recordings, transcripts, and bank trails into a single binder. On the cover, I wrote one word: truth. Then I called an old contact at the Australian Federal Police, someone who had once partnered with me during a real estate fraud investigation. When I explained, his voice hardened. "Alara, bring everything tomorrow. We'll handle it." The spider's web was ready. Freya thought she was the predator. She didn't realize she had walked straight into mine. The day I carried the binder-marked truth into the federal police building, my hands were steady. Decades of boardroom battles had trained me to mask fear, but inside, my heart thudded like a drum. I had lived quietly in the shadows, keeping my wealth hidden even from my son, but now my silence was the very weapon Freya tried to use against me. Detective Harris, the officer I trusted, flipped through the pages with a practiced eye. He paused at the transcripts, his brow lifting at Freya's greedy words. When he reached the evidence on Dr. Magnus, the false testimonies, the hidden payments, he whistled under his breath. This is bigger than her, Alara. You've just opened a nest of vipers. That was when I realized the story was no longer just about my humiliation with mashed potatoes. It was about dismantling a network of predators who had perfected their scheme through manipulation and deceit. The police asked me to continue playing the fragile widow for a while longer. They wanted her to be comfortable, confident, and unguarded. It broke me a little every time Adrian looked at me with pity instead of respect, but I told myself it was for his safety. He had to see her mask shatter on its own, not through my words. And then the moment came. It was a Saturday afternoon, sunny and warm, when Adrian called me in a rush. Mom, Freya says you're not well. We're coming over. Don't worry, everything will be fine. His voice was tight, rehearsed. I knew Freya was beside him. I lit a candle, placed a teapot on the table, and waited in silence. When they arrived, Freya wore a smug smile, her arm hooked possessively through Adrian's. She glanced around my modest terrace house with disdain, not knowing that the title deed was just one of hundreds I owned across Australia. Mother, she began dramatically, we've spoken to Dr. Kellerman. He believes it's best if Adrian and I take full control of your finances. For your own good, of course. Her words rang in the room, sharp as glass. I looked at Adrian, his eyes conflicted, his mouth opening and closing like a boy caught between duty and denial. Before I could reply, the door knocked sharply. Detective Harris entered, flanked by two uniformed officers. Freya's face was drained of color. Freya Jensen, Harris said firmly, his voice carrying authority. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, manipulation, and attempted financial exploitation. He recited her rights as the officers pulled her wrists behind her, snapping on cold metal. What is this? Adrian shouted, rising from his chair, his face crimson. There must be some mistake. I stood slowly, my back straighter than it had been in years. No mistake, Adrian. She used you. She used all of us. Every word she spoke here, every plan she made, it's all recorded. She was never pregnant, Adrian. She never wanted you. She only wanted what I built. Freya thrashed against the officers, her voice shrill. She's lying. She's senile. She's making this up. But Harris dropped the binder on the table with a heavy thud. We have her recordings, son. We have the bank transfers. We even have Dr. Kellerman's signature on fraudulent medical reports. It's over. Adrian's shoulders collapsed as if someone had yanked the bones out of him. He sank into the chair, staring blankly as they dragged Freya out screaming, her manicured nails scratching against the doorway as if she could claw her way back inside. For the first time in years, silence filled the house, thick and suffocating. Adrian turned his eyes on me, eyes that once sparkled with childish trust, now heavy with shame. You knew, he whispered hoarsely. All this time you knew. I lowered myself beside him, touching his hand. Yes, Adrian. I knew. I hid the truth to protect you. I thought if you believed I was ordinary, you'd find someone who loved you for you, not for what you could inherit. But in trying to shield you, I kept you blind. And blindness is its own cruelty. Tears slipped down his cheeks, raw and unashamed. I let her humiliate you. At the wedding I just sat there. I did nothing. What kind of son does that? His voice cracked, and my own tears welled. A son who didn't know the weight his mother carried. A son who trusted too easily. But Adrian, it isn't too late. We can rebuild. The weeks that followed were a blur of trials and headlines. Freya's face splashed across newspapers, labeled the Potato Bride by tabloids mocking her cruel stunt, her reputation shredded. Dr. Kellerman's empire crumbled as victims came forward, and he was dragged into courtrooms he once controlled. Justice, slow but steady, had finally caught them. Adrian, though shattered, began to see the world with clearer eyes. He came to me one evening, sitting at the same kitchen table where I had once plotted in silence. "Teach me," he said simply. "Teach me what you built. I don't want to be blind anymore." And so, I opened the doors I had kept locked for decades. I showed him the penthouses under different names, the skyscrapers I quietly owned shares in, the coastal lands whose value had multiplied tenfold. His jaw dropped, his hands trembling as he realized his mother was not the fragile widow he thought, but a titan who had hidden her empire to protect him. At first, he was angry that I had lied, that I had let him believe we were scraping by. But over time, that anger softened into awe, then respect. Together we walked through offices where my signature was law, through streets lined with properties I had fought to secure. For the first time, he saw me not as a burden, but as a woman of strength. One evening, as the sun dipped low over Sydney Harbor, Adrian turned to me. "You were right, Mum. Every sacrifice, every secret, it was to protect me. I see that now. And I want to make sure when you're gone, everything you built is carried forward." I smiled faintly, my chest warm with pride. "Then you'll have to learn not just how to build wealth, Adrian, but how to protect it. Not just with money, but with wisdom." And so, the circle closed. From mashed potatoes smeared across. Hope for a future rebuilt not on lies, but on understanding. Because every mistake, every secret, every scar I carried had led to this moment. To sitting beside my son, planning a future together. To finally know that everything I had endured was worth it. Moral lesson: sometimes love requires silence, sacrifice, and hidden strength. Yet truth, though painful, becomes the bridge that heals broken bonds and protects generations yet to come. Like this story, subscribe for more, share with your friends, and comment on the lesson you'll carry forward.